Hi everybody, Leslie here. I've got two lovely sliding puzzle cards for you today. All the products I'm using today happen to come from The Works in the UK, which is, if you don't know, it's like they sell books and craft products and balloons. So it's a bit of a stationery shop as well. So it sells all sorts. But they've got their own craft range called Make and Create. So everything that I'm using today happens to come from the autumn collection. The only thing that isn't is the thank you die, and that's from Time for Tea Designs. So if you want to see more on the products I used, I did a really quick video. It's only about 3 minutes of what did I get, and I showed all the products. So this is a full 6x6 inch edge to edge sliding puzzle card using a whole sheet of the pattern paper, and these are inch square pieces. So I'll take you through the whole process, how to make this absolutely from scratch. There's no specialist crafting equipment required to make this. All you need are things like a trimmer, pen, pencil, rulers, nothing fancy needed. If you want to obviously put a die cut word on the top, you would need the die that would cut that out and things. But you could use a stamped image. It wouldn't need to be this on the top. And then the second one that I'm going to show you today, it's using much smaller pieces. So instead of these being an inch square piece, these are 3/4 of an inch. So hopefully you can see they're quite a bit smaller sized pieces. And I've done a video previously with even tinier pieces, but they were in metric measurements. So I thought I'd do one with smaller pieces, but with imperial measurements. So this is all in inch sizes today. I will put all of the measurements for this card, which is a new size, I've not done this one before, on a blog post. So you'll be able to get all the sizes. My blog's on www.handmadeinwindsor.co.uk/blog. So handmadeinwindsor.co.uk, and my blog's on there. You'll find it if you just get to my main web page. So these are smaller pieces, and like I say, everything is from my little mini autumn haul from The Works. So let's get on with it and make these two cards. Now, I loved this, and I thought this would make a great sliding puzzle card because it's got repeated images across it. So there's repeat images, which means once you've mixed it up, it becomes a bit more tricky to work out where those little pieces go. So I thought I'm going to use the full 6x6 sheet, and I've got all my bits cut out ready, and we'll just do a really quick make. But because this paper pad is only 160 GSM, I wanted to show you what I've done with it. I've backed it onto, this was just in my scraps, and it's sort of a heavyweight paper. It's not really thin paper, but it's not as thick as the pattern paper at 160 GSM. But I think the two of these probably together are probably going to get me up to the 200, 220 GSM, hopefully. So it's just a bit sturdier, so that when I cut it up, it'll make slightly sturdier pieces. And all I did, and I did this morning so I had time to dry, was put wet glue all over the back and smoothed it down really well onto my piece of scrap paper. And I wanted it to be dry because when you cut it up, if you've not let the glue dry, rather than cutting through cleanly, it stretches the fibre, and that's when you get tearing. So it's really important, if you're using wet glue especially, to try and let it dry. And that's the same goes for die cutting. You don't want to be stretching the fibre, you want it to cut cleanly through it. And that's a lot harder for any sort of paper cutting when it's damp than when you've let it really dry. So for the same reason, out of the dotty pattern paper that's in the same set, I cut out my thank you, which is just this one. This is a Time for Tea Designs. That's another British company, Time for Tea Designs. They do some really cute stamps and dies. It's their thank you. It's just called Thank You. And I cut it out with a pattern paper, and I cut it out of just some coordinating sort of cream cardstock, just to give it a little drop shadow. And I stuck the two layers together Hopefully you can see. I stuck those 2 layers together and stuck it all down. And I just did that this morning just so that it'd have time to dry before I came and started actually cutting it all up. So that's pretty much all we're going to use on this card. So I'm going for the full 6x6, and I'm just going to take my scissors and cut this out. So there we go, all nicely backed, and as you can see, it's a lot sturdier. All right, so if you've not made a sliding puzzle card before, you need a backing piece that's the same size as what you're going to make. So this is a 6x6 piece of pattern paper. So I've got a 6" by 6" backing strip. Now, mine actually, because I was pulling out of my scraps, is actually a bit narrower side to side. So can you see on the edge? It's a little bit narrow, but for our purposes, it doesn't matter. It's still 6 inches in one dimension, but not the other. So I've kept the 6" dimension for the height of our card, and the width is just, probably see better that way around. It's just a bit narrow, but it doesn't matter because we're going to stick this onto a card, and that's just because my scraps, I didn't have anything big enough in it. So we're just going to sit this to the side for a moment. So what you want to do is mark your back piece. So in this direction, it is the full 6 inches. And you might want to mark at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. So we've got nice evenly spaced lines at 1 inch. And I just did that with a pencil and a T-ruler. And then you're going to need some strips. So to stick to your base piece, you need strips. They do need to be card. They need to be sturdy enough that they're going to stay intact when things get fiddled with. You need, if you're doing a 6 inch, you need 7 of them. So you always need the number of pieces you're going to cut it into. So as I'm cutting into inch squares, so 6 inches, you need 7. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I cut an extra one. So we need 7 that are the 6 inches wide, because we're doing a 6 inch card, by 3/4 of an inch. So these are all 3/4 of an inch wide and the same width as our top panel. Then we also need same width, 6 inches, and these are 1/2 inch. And we just need 6 of these, and I think I've got some extra of these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Oh no, I've cut the right number. So if it's a 6 by 6 inch puzzle you're making, cutting them into inch pieces, you need 6. So for your 3/4 of an inch, you need 6 plus 1, so you need 7. And for your 1/2 inch wide, you need 6. And that's everything we need, except we need something to raise our pieces up on. So I thought I'd show you with this card how to make your own foam strips. So this is literally funky foam that's left over from when my kids were little. So this is the children's craft foam. You can usually find it in the UK, you can find it in the range, you can find it in the works. It's just the craft foam that they sell for kids to craft with. And I've got a drawer full of it left over from when my children were little. As you can see, this is where they cut things out. That piece was out in there. So they've used bits of it over the years, and I've got bits and pieces all over. And all I've done is using my really cheap, this is double-sided tape, the post box. I think this is from a pound shop or something like that. It could be, you know, a B&M type place, but it's from one of the really cheap shops in the UK. And it was 4, so it was either 4 for £1 or 4 for not very much money. So just using my really cheap double-sided tape, I've just backed it on both sides, which is really quick to do. If you've got a guillotine, I find it cuts really nicely. So my 6 inches is about there. I'm going to make it a little bit longer. Shove everything up. Make everything, I'm making it a bit longer so it can overhang and I can trim it off. And there you go. Even with the sticky on both sides, it still cuts no problem. So we're going to make these 1/4 inch. So I'm just going to slide it along. one square, and there I've got my 1/4 inch double-sided foam tape. Very quickly, I've just cut myself a ton of 1/2 inch foam strips. So if you don't have access to double-sided foam tape on a roll or on strips, or you just want to be a bit more frugal, make it yourself out of the cheap kids craft foam. So what we do to start with is we take our strips and peel the backing off one and stick it as straight as you can in the middle of your line. So I'm just using, hopefully you can see, the line as a guide and sticking it across the middle. Okay. And if some of your homemade strips are squarer than others, use your square ones. Some of mine, because the tape is shiny, the backing on it, it does slip sometimes in your cutting machine. So all I'm doing is the line that I'm using, I'm getting my tape in line with my line, in line with one of the lines on my board, and making sure that it's running across and landing in the middle. And because I don't want to put my head over the top, because you'll see me on the camera, I'm just making sure it's as straight as I can get it. So you put one on each strip, and look, even when this is where the joint in my tape was, I can still peel both of those off and use this piece. It's got plenty sticky on it, and because my board's a centimetres board and we're working in inches, I do have to move it every time to get it lined up with a line. So the last two are, you want to pop one at the top and at the bottom, and just to make sure, yeah, we've got plenty space left at the top, so I can put this in line at the top. So these 1/2 inch pieces need to still be able to fit in all these gaps. There'll be plenty of room in all the middle ones, but just make sure when you get to the top and the bottom that there's still space. And yeah, I've got that right on the top, as straight as I can get it. So now we just want to flip it over and chop off all these little extra bits. Your 6 pieces that are 1/2 inch, your 6 strips that are 1/2 inch, we need to do the same thing to these and stick one of our strips straight down the centre. So we've got our base piece and we've got all of our strips. Don't cut these up yet. These are going to sit in these slots, and this is how we get our spacing correct. Okay, so we've got ones that will slide in and out, and we've got our fixed ones. You want to pick the centre, so in this case it's this one, and peel your tape off the centre one. So the one that's fixed, and this is where we use our 3/4 inch strips. Okay, so our 3/4 inch wide, you just want to, I'm doing the same thing, I'm going to use a line on my board, and I'm going to do the same thing, and you just sit that in the middle of that strip. It doesn't need to be dead centre of it, but you just want it straight across the middle with it roughly in the centre. So now we've got this piece sat, our slidey in and out one, you want to butt your foam tape tight up to it. Peel the top off your next fixed one, and using that as your spacer, you need to butt your next one. I'm just going to sit that out of the way a sec. You need to butt this one up to it. Now, you need this to still slide in and out, okay? So as you can see, still slides in and out. It can be quite tight. I'm not, because I'm going edge to edge on this card and making the full 6x6 of my 6x6 card, I don't want my pieces to come flying out too easily, okay? So I want it to be quite tight, but I still want to be able to move it. Okay, so same thing for the next one. Put your piece in. I'm just using my fingers to hold that in. I'm going to sit this one out of the way for a minute. Peel my tape off. Okay, so this one butted tight against here. Get your next piece and butt it up to your foam tape. Okay, so that's a bit tighter. That's okay, it still moves. In this case, slightly tighter is actually slightly better because, like I say, we're using the full width. Now, this is occasionally, depending on how well you cut your tape, and how close. So can you see on this one, I haven't actually got it in the centre. Hopefully you can see. My light's not very good today, is it? I've got it further to one side than the other, so I think if I flip this one over, it will probably fit, but it wouldn't fit the other way up. So that's because I didn't really get that in the middle, but it fits fine this way. So if one of your strips doesn't fit on your edge pieces, just flip it round and then it probably will. It's all about how accurate you are sticking things in, but there's enough wiggle room usually in all of the measurements that I give you, unless I say otherwise, that it's going to work with the measurements that I've given you. So the same thing, and this one will overhang at the top, don't worry about that. We're going to trim it off in a minute. So that one now slides in and out, that one slides in and out, that one slides in and out, and then I flip it over and work the other way. Because I've used a fat strip up there, you'll see it's probably more than a 1/4 inch wide, this one. And what I'm actually going to do is get one of my other strips and use this one as a spacer so I can see the line, and I'm not going to worry if it hangs off the top. So if you want to wait for your top strip until you've got these, and the same for the bottom strip, until you've got these slider pieces in, you can do that and use it as a spacer. So now if you see, when I flip this over, it's slightly hanging off, but it's fine. And I'm going to leave it hanging off like that for a minute because we've not got our strip stuck on there yet, and it'll be easier to trim it. So we're back to where we should have been with our last one. Pull the tape off our last one and pop our last strip on top there. Okay, so we've got our piece. Everything now should slide in and out like this. Okay, so these pieces are what our puzzle's going to be stuck to. And because I've not used uniform foam tape and my slots vary slightly, I'm going to keep them in that right order. So I'm keeping them in that order. I'm just going to pick this up and cut off the overhang that's on the top and bottom, because I know my piece is 6 inches tall. So I'm going to chop that off and go into my back piece now. I'm going to cut through, stick into my scissors, it's fine, and cut off the overhang at the top. And anything that's hanging off the edges is also just going to get a quick trim. Our base now is actually completely ready, and all we need to do is cut these into 1-inch strips. So all I'm going to do is use my metal ruler where the measurements go right to the end, and these are all 6 inches wide, so I'm going to slide that to the 5 and just use my scissors, cut. Of course, if you've not got a ruler where the measurements go right to the end, you could do it with a pencil and ruler and just mark them. Either way, it doesn't matter, just cut them all to roughly 1 inch. It does not need to be really accurate. We will trim them again at the end before we're finished. So slide them back in. This is why I said keep them for the right slots, and do the same all the way up. And the final step is to cut up our top panel. So this is a really basic, just a little bit of things stuck on it, so it's still nice and flat. So my guillotine should cut through this with no issues. But like I said, this was why I wanted the glue to be dry. So I'm just going to cut this up into 1-inch squares. So I'm going to go 1 inch in this direction and cut it every 1 inch. Keeping everything in line. Turn it all around. Ooh. And then slide it back in my trimmer. And I usually have a piece of scrap. So this is from the card I was making the other day. It's one of the edges. So I get everything lined back in the right order, lined back, and I'm just using the piece of scrap, so everything's square to the bottom and square to my piece of scrap card, so I can then use it to slide everything along and check it's, oh, I've slid at the bottom, and slid to the 5-inch line, and try and keep your pieces in the right order. There we go, all chopped up into our 1-inch squares and put back together in the right order. This is important. You need everything in the right order. And what we're going to do is start off in our bottom corner. This is the bottom corner that I know is square with my back piece, which I know is the right size. Or if you've done like me and it's not quite 6 inches wide, you need it 6 inches tall, not quite 6 inches, don't worry, just square everything up to this bottom corner. So you want to take your foam tape off your first little piece, get the corresponding bottom corner, and get that as square as you possibly can to that bottom corner, okay? So that should be lined up at the bottom and lined up with the side. And if you get that first piece in, everything else is simple, because all we're going to do is go along, match up each piece to the last one, and get it all as lined up and flat and square as we possibly can. So the overhang is stuck to the back of that one, so it's fine. So when the puzzle's on the card, we can slide them all over and you won't know that the back's not quite wide enough. So just keep going, same on every row, line it up with the one below, butt it up tight as possible. And then when you come to do your puzzle, everything will sit nice and flat when it's in the finished, complete position. I just want to show you, I hadn't noticed when I was cutting up, I've lost a tiny bit of my Y there, it's come unstuck. So I just need to put a tiny bit of glue on that in a minute, just to make sure I don't lose it completely. So there we go. It only takes a few minutes to get all those bits stuck down. And I think this would be a good one to mass produce. So for example, if you were doing, I don't know, maybe Thanksgiving cards. If you're in the US, obviously we don't do Thanksgiving in the UK, but if you were doing something like Thanksgiving cards, obviously pattern paper takes no time at all to cut down. And if you just cut all your strips in one session, so you need 3/4 inch wide strips and 1/2 inch wide strips if you're making inch square cards, and then whatever you put on your top piece, you just go and cut them all into inch square pieces. It doesn't take long at all once you get into the rhythm. Now, what I will show you is, this is what I said, it doesn't matter about cutting these pieces to exactly an inch, because we are going to come back and give them all a little haircut. So what tends to happen is the pieces sort of shunt each other along a bit. So all I do is come back at the end. My scissors are not cutting the top piece. And you see they're tipped. So the pieces here, and they're tipped away from the top piece. And I've just given it a tiny little haircut. In that case, it only cut a bit of the foam. So, but on this one, hopefully you can see that quite clearly, because I've used the red foam so you can see it's sticking out quite a lot. So again, just tip your scissors and give it a little trim. So it just trims a little bit off, and it's usually on one side, not both. So same here, this side's fine, this side it's sticking out slightly. And you can just go along and do each row at a time. Because I didn't put this on the thickest card, it's still a bit flexible. But obviously, this is going on a card blank. So I've got one of my 6x6 card blanks. These are just pre-scored ones. I think this happens to be a Hobbycraft one, maybe? I think it's Hobbycraft one. And I'm just going to check that this is going to sit on here. And I'm happy at least with the height of it, because like I said, the pieces can overhang ever so slightly side, and everything will flatten out nicely once the back's a bit more stable. So yeah, I'm happy that's going to fit. So I'm just going to put glue all over this and stick my back panel onto here. And wet glue obviously gives you the most wiggle time. If you're confident with tape, feel free to do it with tape. But wet glue's good and strong, gives you plenty wiggle. And I'm just going to stick this into that corner and just use it to get my bottom lined up with my bottom. And as I said, my edges don't actually matter as much because it overhangs. So I'm just going to flip it open and give it a good burnish down from the back. And I think it's quite fun. You can see the red foam on the edges. So all my piece is going to fall off when I do it that way. You can see all the red foam on the edges. So obviously I've not got this as tight as I thought I was going to, because my pieces are falling off, look. But that's okay. So there we go. Really simple one using pattern paper and a single die cut word. Now I did think, because these pieces are quite big and I've got these lovely matching enamel dots that were from the same set of products in the range, I thought, I've said it a few times, once you've cut it up and got it on your card, you can add embellishments on top. Obviously, as long as they don't go across the edges. So let's pop a few of these on. So I've just gone for a sort of diagonal line. Just gives it something a little extra, doesn't it? I could have gone with all one colour, but I thought it's such colourful paper. I've gone for 5 different colours. I really like that. And then obviously you can do whatever you want on the front inside. And because this is a top fold, once you've done your puzzle, if you're opening it this way, even though it is a bit loose this way, it's not so bad this way. It's a bit loose in that direction. And like I said, it just depends how tightly you manage to put your things up. But because you're opening it this way on this card, they don't all come flying off, which is a bonus. So yeah, it stands up. And obviously if you used a closer toned foam tape, or you had white foam tape in there, it wouldn't be so obvious on that edge. But I thought it was good for you to be able to see it on camera, for me to do it in a completely contrasting colour so you could see what I was doing. And the red sort of goes with the pattern paper in this instance. I think I'd send them with all the pieces loose in the envelope. And hopefully you can see what I was saying about it being a repeating pattern. So like this yellow mushroom's there as well. And, you know, these pink ones are on lots of different pieces, even without the words in the middle. So yeah, you've got lots of fun puzzle time with that one. So this next card is going to be a bit smaller pieces than the one we just did. So the last one, all of the pieces were 1 inch square. And on the video that I did last week, the pieces that I did on this one, which was done with metric measurements, these are 1.5 centimetres square. So I thought I'd try to do something with slightly smaller pieces, but with imperial measurement, so in inches. Now I can't get them quite this small. Everything just got too fiddly. So for this card, we're going to go 3/4 of an inch pieces. So this is my top panel, and all I've done with a scrap of card from my scraps box, which had some red ink on it already. I used the stamp set from my haul from the Works. This was only £3 and included the ink pad, so I just used every single stamp on there and just randomly stamped in all the different colours, the 3 different colours, onto my piece of card. This is 4.5 inches. So because we're going to cut it up into 3/4 inch pieces, it obviously needs to be able to divide by 3/4. So I've got a 4.5 inch square, and for my back piece, another 4.5 inch square. And I marked it every 3/4 of an inch. So I marked it at 3/4 of an inch, 1.5 inch, 2.25 inches, 3 inches, and 3 3/4 inches. I'll put all the numbers for the different sizes on my blog, which is www.handmadeinwindsor.co.uk/blog. So I'll pop them all on the blog post that's got this card in it so that you can see all the measurements. But at the moment, we've just got a 4.5 inch square marked every 3/4 of an inch along. And then, as we've done every other time, I've stuck my strips to it. So the size that I've gone with for this card was 1/2 inch. I did it in the same way as the last card, and all of the strips that are going to get stuck to the back panel, as you can see, these had ink on them. This really was out of my scraps. So all of the strips, both the ones being stuck down to the back panel and the ones to this panel, are 1/2 inch. So I've made this in exactly the same way. I just used my foam tape to make it. My foam tape is 3/16 of an inch wide. These measurements will probably work with it up to about 1/4 inch wide, so slightly wider than this. Mine is actually 1/2 centimetre, which is more or less 3/16 of an inch. And the measurements work just about. You might need to overhang your foam off the edges and then trim it, which is what I've had to do. So on this side, can you see in there on that corner, the foam tape's quite narrow? And that's just because if you don't get all your foam tape dead straight and all your spacing dead straight, you'll run out of space. But if you have all of your strips cut to a 1/2 inch wide, it should, with a little bit of play at the top and the bottom, still just about fit on your panel. So the only thing left to do is now cut these into 3/4 inch. So of course, don't get mixed up. In the same way, my 4.5 inch strips to start with, I'm going to cut them down at every 3/4 of an inch. So all ready to go, just need to cut my top panel into 3/4 inch squares. Always double check before you start cutting your top panel up, because yes, I have decorated one and cut it to the wrong size. And another little trick I wanted to show you to do this. So I've shown where you use a piece of scrap to keep them all butted together. The other thing you can do, but I would recommend flipping it over if you're going to do this. So if you do accidentally rip anything, it's on the back. So let's just flip everything over and just get yourself a piece of washi tape. So I've got some nice low tack washi tape. I know this is nice and low tack. And just make sure everything's lined up. Again, you can use yourself a piece of scrap. And just get everything square and stick them together at the one end with your piece of low tack tape. So mine are all stuck together now, and I can just shunt them along. And so I only need to do that the once. And the nice thing is, your last row stays stuck together when you do it that way. So we've got exactly the same process as we had before. Stick our pieces to our base. So there we go, all stuck together, all sits lovely and flat. And hopefully you can tell that's going to be quite a tricky puzzle, because the Hello Autumn, which is the only bit that's got any words on it, is slap bang in the middle there. And all the other things are just stamped around. Now, I still need to come back and trim these little edges off, but I'm actually going to wait and do that when I finish the card, because I wanted to show you what I'd done and what I was going to mount this onto. So, for on the last card, I'm nothing if not frugal. So, because I'd already decided what I was going to do, I gutted this piece of paper to get the thank you out of it, because this is going to go on top of here. So, the paper pad collection that I used came with a stencil available, and I thought I'm going to use every single thing I bought. So I picked the plain darker pattern that toned in with the inks. So it's this one. I debated picking one of the pale ones, but I quite like the dark because it picked out like the dark bits on this. So I'm going to mount this on here. But I thought, well, that's a bit too plain when it was just the plain paper. So what I did with the stencil that matched, I picked some of the images off the stencil, and I used the inks that came with the stamp set. So the same inks, and these are my little pound shop makeup sponges. So I just use those on the pigment inks to sponge through. Hopefully you can see on the pumpkin down here, it's sort of orangey in the middle. So I just did a bit of blending onto it. So off the edges of the page, so this one's more orangey, you know, with some dark bits and one of the leaves. So I just made sure that I'd got something on each corner just to make it a bit more exciting. So this is going to get mounted on there. And because it was pigment ink, and I put quite a lot on, and this isn't coated paper, but I wasn't sure if it would, how quickly the ink would dry on it. I wasn't sure if it would sit on the surface and take forever to dry. So I just, once I'd inked through it and I'd done all of the corners all at once, I just heat embossed it with the Wow Clear Gloss regular embossing powder. But if I'd not had embossing powder, so if you're new to crafting and you've just been getting some of these bits and pieces in the works, like I say, you don't need fancy scrapbooking, card making brushes or anything. These are literally makeup sponges that come in a great big bag from a pound shop. So that's all that was. So that was the stencil. That was a £1.50 stencil that matched in with all these things from the work, and I've probably got ink on me now. And all I'm going to do is I've got my 6x6 card, and I'm going to stick my paper straight on the front, and it should all match up nicely. And then again, stick my puzzle in the middle, and then I'll come back and take all the pieces out and trim off all the little edges, just like I did on the previous card. So again, glue all over the back of this, so no one will ever know that I borrowed the middle of that piece of pattern paper. So now that's stuck down, I'm just going to trim all these bits. Again, I think that would be a really lovely one if you were doing maybe Thanksgiving cards if you're in the US. Or you could have made it a birthday card with a birthday sentiment in the middle. But there you go, with only a few supplies, basic craft supplies, no specialist dies, nothing fancy needed for this one. So that was the stamps, the paper, the stencils, the ink pads, all from my mini haul from the works. It cost about £8, and that's including the gems that I've not put any on. In fact, shall we put some on? Yeah, why not? Let's add a few. I'm thinking around the background. So because these pieces are quite small, I'm not going to put them on the puzzle. So I've just used some of the ones that were the same tone as the paper. All I've added to make that was the card that I stamped on and all the other scraps underneath. But like I said, they can be scraps that you've messed up on. So really inexpensive to make a really fancy card. So this is the different piece sizes. So this is a 1-inch square. This is the 3/4 of an inch square. So you can see it's quite a bit smaller. And if you want to go for the really tiny size, I would swap to metric if you want to go smaller. So I've got the 1-inch square, 3/4 of an inch square, and that's the 1.5 centimetre square. And if you metric for the larger size, go with 2.5 centimetre squares. I did that in the first video. I'll make sure that's linked in the description. But yeah, I did 2.5 centimetre square, which is almost exactly an inch. It's slightly different, but you can use the sizes from my original video. So that's 3 different sized sliding puzzle cards that I've done now. I wouldn't go any smaller than this. And like I say, in Imperial, I wouldn't go any smaller than this. The 1/2 inch, I did try it. It was just way too fiddly. I don't think I'll do any more sizes. I think that's quite enough. But I am going to change over and do some Christmas themed ones now. So thank you for watching me make these 2. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Everything made sense. If not, do ask me in the comments. I do respond to every comment that I get. It'd be fantastic if you've been enjoying this content to subscribe, like, comment, all that lovely stuff. It really means a lot to all of us little creators when people interact with us and we know there's somebody out there watching. So I will be back hopefully next week sometime, and I'm going to go Christmassy. And I'm going to do some sliding puzzle cards with a Christmas theme. So see you again soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.